Hi, in this video I want to discuss the idea of malingering and how sometimes it's this idea and refuting this idea have how sometimes how a way to defeat the idea of the positive and negative, the deprivation, and it's the idea of depending on the circumstances or life in a general state of mind of comfort. It's like malingering in the middle, where you're staying in the middle long enough, close enough to your desire, where anywhere in the middle between your dissatisfaction and your satisfaction, and malingering in that moment of time, in some sort of middle state where you're not completely satisfied and you're not completely dissatisfied, or you're completely deprived and completely in pain, sort of like having the nail halfway out, but you get the satisfaction halfway out, but you keep it there, and you just keep on sticking the nail a little bit in and a little bit out and a little bit in. It's gone all the way in. You pulled it halfway out, and then you pull a little more out. Then you want to push it back in a little bit, and satisfied pulling it out again, and sort of like malingering in a state of right in the middle, where you're constantly going a little bit, and you're sort of going back and forth between the middle states, as opposed to a complete satisfaction, as opposed to completely taking the nail out of your foot. You're constantly just pushing it in a little bit and taking it out a little bit, and constantly doing that over and over again. So this idea of malingering and how that obviously it really doesn't prove any, it doesn't make any point to the existence anyway. It doesn't create any point, because if you're malingering, you're not changing the state much, so obviously you're not getting as much satisfaction. Sitting in the middle often means a less an opposite, less of a reaction in response to the deprivation you're experiencing. So the less of a deprivation you're experiencing relative to the the less of a deprivation you're experiencing relative, you're going to have a less positive experience, usually typically speaking, because the negative can, a small negative can't compensate with, usually necessarily can't compensate with a big positive, at least from, obviously there's things like surprises that can compensate. You did this amount of work and you ended up winning the lottery or something. Obviously there's examples like that, but the examples obviously based on, at least in that example, a societal standard where everyone else has to lose. You're building a mountain and then you're using everyone else to make that mountain. Obviously, it takes the victimization of a lot of other people to win the lottery, so those concepts are built off of a lot of losing, a lot of deprivation from everyone, just so one person get all the money, or get all the pride, or whatever it may be. So it's about standing in the middle, and you're constantly taking the nail in and out, and then you're going just far enough out, but then you want to go back in, so you're malingering right in the middle, as opposed to just, pushing it all the way in, then taking it all the way out. And it almost defeats the whole point of anything that makes any meaning in the existence that we're living in, such as, obviously you want to have greater satisfaction, so you're going to have to go through a greater negative to get the greater satisfaction. Malingering in the middle, you're not going to have any kind of satisfaction that satisfies the deprivation, a greater deprivation that you would have gone through to satisfy some kind of greater positive that you can experience in compensation for the negative that you experienced. So malingering in the middle doesn't really prove any point other than that. And obviously, if you're close enough to your satisfaction, you're obviously going to achieve your satisfaction. If you're just staying in the middle, you're not doing anything, but just sort of mitigating the pain, then slightly, then going right back, and then causing more pain, and then you're just trying to stay in the middle as long as you can. Sort of like having a bladder that's half full, but not, and trying to not going pee, not drinking any more water, and just sort of staying in that state where, obviously, the state only means something when you're trying to maintain something, so that the next time, every time you malinger, you're only trying to make the next time you feel satisfaction all the more positive. You're almost in a way hoping for some greater positive, that once you say something that will say that you release, the release of it obviously is to gain some greater satisfaction, sort of like holding your bladder in, but not drinking any water, not going pee, just sort of sitting there, and it's almost in a way to create meaning in your life, to make it feel like once you finally do pee in the end, you finally do release, you empty your bladder, it's all the more satisfying in the end. So it's all about satisfying something in the end, no matter how you want to malinger in some kind of middle state. The middle state's an illusion. It doesn't really exist. It depends on the circumstance. The circumstance as a whole is the whole idea based on this whole positive and negative, and then positive and negative are created, the whole circumstances of the scale are created by the individual circumstance, and it's just the individual circumstance is created by whatever pain you're experiencing. So even if you got a nail in your foot, obviously you're experiencing some kind of deprivation, you're feeling some kind of pain, but obviously once you're going on you're creating a different scale when you you take it halfway out, and then you go a little bit in, you go a little way out, obviously, because it's within the same scale when you are from the whole nail being in your foot, and then you're trying to pull the nail out, but since you're obviously doing a little in and a little out, it almost it depreciates from the idea. It makes the whole idea of the nail going all the way in, and it puts it on a smaller level. So that becomes your deprivation. That becomes the weight, the scale that you're using now to describe the situation of pain and deprivation. So malingering, sort of like prolonging sex or prolonging something, or doing sort of like malingering in the buildup of something and the tension of something, doesn't make it all better. It doesn't explain it away, because it's on the same scale, it's on the same thing. You're obviously holding out for something, you're doing it, you're making it last longer, so the satisfaction in the end is greater. You're not doing it, so you're just going to sit there and stay in that position. It's fleeting, it's going to last only so long, obviously, depending on the circumstance, but it's going to be something that happens, and you're doing it for greater satisfaction in the end. You're not malingering for no good reason. You're malingering for some kind of greater satisfaction in the end, hoping for something greater, and the malingering all is about just the greater tension, the greater buildup of some of the work, and the pressure and the tension that you build up from doing something. So malingering, the idea of some kind of middle state and staying as close to the positive without really reaching the positive. What's the point? Without feeling like you're going to achieve something greater in the end. It's all about satisfaction, a desire, something pulling force that makes us want to desire, and a deprivation that makes the drive for this desire, builds up the tension for this desire, and makes the desire and the satisfaction and this tension and the deprivation, and the releasing of this deprivation all the more meaningful in the end. So that's all we're trying to do anyway. It's about greater satisfaction. Malingering is just holding out for that satisfaction, hoping to build up in tension. So the idea of middle is an illusion. The idea of putting that on the scale doesn't exist in any reasonable sense in describing the concept. Obviously, you can say it exists based on specific examples, but not recognizing that you're just explaining the very function of deprivation to begin with. It doesn't do anything more or anything less. It's the same mechanism. You're not doing anything but trying to do it for a greater satisfaction in the end. So it's nothing more, nothing less. So I think that explains it enough. Malingering, the idea of staying in some kind of middle state, the constant chase, being in the right place of chase, just being in the right state of mind, the right chase, being in the right moment in the chase, just being close enough, always having it right out of your grasp, right out of a grasp, or right about to grab it, but constantly being in that state or something. Only defeats the point of the state, because it's all about finally, obviously, not only would you get sick of that kind of state, you obviously you want something more, and the more would be finally satisfying the deprivation, the satisfaction, trying to finally reach that kind of state. So that's all we're doing anyway. We're trying to finally reach a state, and it requires the catching up. It requires, and obviously, and then in of that self of constantly trying to just being right out of the grasp, or being in the middle somewhere. Going back and forth on a smaller scale. All you're doing is going back and forth on a smaller scale, on the bigger scale that you once were in, or it's completely indifferent. You change the scale, and it's no longer this and this, it's this and this, but it's still the same scale, and you're going back and forth once you change the variables in that kind of situation, the satisfaction, the deprivation, the very specific circumstances of the thing that you're dealing with, the deprivation that you're dealing with at the moment. So malingering isn't an idea that really exists. The whole idea of chase is to finally get what you want, and then going back to the beginning and building up that chase from the beginning all over again to make all the more satisfying the build-up of the chase from the beginning all the way to the end, all the more satisfying. So this malingering, going back and forth in the middle, making the deprivation less, but you're not experiencing much, sort of like mitigating, so you're not going to experience as much negative, but you're not going to experience as much positive. So that's obviously the scales you're going to, obviously it's about experiencing more less negative, but experience less positive. And obviously it's all about experiencing less negative and as opposed to the positive, but it's about, and obviously the satisfaction is what makes it all worth in the end. So, but in the way you have to, in a way it's an idea, but the idea of the scale that I'm talking about exists. The idea of the malingering in the middle exists on a different scale, and that's the biggest point I want to make. And it's all about mitigating against the pain. So would you give up more pain? Would you give up experiencing less pain, but for a lesser positive in the end? And obviously the positive in the end is going to be something that leads right back to a deprivation. So the greater the deprivation, usually the greater the release, the satisfaction that you experience, and the greater the lesser the negative, the lesser the positive, usually speaking. Obviously, unless like the lottery example or things like that an example, but obviously it's built upon a mountain of things, and obviously it can't be explained away other than saying that you're obviously going to be it's at the expense of everyone else, and so on and so forth. There's plenty of dead bodies, and you're standing there on top of the mountain, like the mountain idea of standing on top of a mountain of corpses, and then you end up losing in the end anyway, because it doesn't accomplish anything but the same goals that we keep on accomplishing over and over again. So obviously it's about mitigating the pain, but obviously the whole scale means something because it's about releasing the pain. So it's a matter of, do you want to have a smaller scale or a bigger scale? Do you want to have more pain but greater gain, or whatever it may be, such as exercising? You obviously go through more pain to get to more gain, but it's like a satisfying gain. It's the tension of the gain. So it's all about weighing what, do you want less pain but less positive, less satisfaction? You want more positive, more negative, and then more positive. It's all about the build-up, obviously, and the tension build-up, and the tension is what makes the satisfaction all the more meaningful, and so on and so forth. But obviously the satisfaction is usually fleeting and very temporal, very ephemeral, and it's just going right back. It's a spring that goes right back, and you're right back to pulling it, and boom, whoop, boom, whoop, and then it's obviously, it's like boom, and long and drawn out, pulling it back, and then you're obviously right back to pulling the same process and doing the same thing over and over again. The life game, that's what we're playing, is the life game. So it's a matter of choosing lesser, and then pain. Obviously, it depends on the deprivation, how you're experiencing your life, and so on and so forth. And if you want to get a greater positive usually out of it, and the lesser the pain, the lesser the positive, the greater the pain, the greater the positive on a scale, any reasonable standards, obviously. Sometimes expectations and things can change, usually build up on another negative mechanism that works in reality. If you end up getting a greater positive out of a negative, it's usually out of the expense of someone else if you get a greater positive out of a lesser negative. And that's what I'm saying, is that it costs someone else something, usually, in those circumstances. I think that's a mechanism that controls these kind of, explains these kinds of movements. The more you get out of something, the less you work. That obviously has an effect. And the less that you go through the pain yourself, it's going to go through someone else as opposed to you, and they're going to make up for the pain that you experience for the greater positive you got for the lesser pain, or the lesser suffering or tension or deprivation. So it's going to go on to someone else to compensate for the lack of pain that you got for the greater gain that you got, the greater gain that you got for the lesser negative, and it's going to go to someone else. So obviously what makes the negative mean anything is the positive you have in the end, but the positive is relying on the negative. So it's all about, there's no malingering, it's on a different scale. Obviously it's something that, depending on the circumstance and the understanding of the circumstance, it's just putting a different scale. There's no malingering towards something, and it's all about satisfying the desire in the end anyway. And if you're close enough to desire, malingering, trying to get the same chase, just having it out of the grasp, obviously that's going to get sick, and you're going to be frustrated, and it's going to build up some tension more and more and more. Obviously the chase is fun, but it's all about getting something in the end, and that's the whole mechanism and where it's broken, because you have to achieve something, and you can't just malinger, constantly just wanting to grab it, constantly being out of reach. That's the whole problem of the game. It's not about constantly just trying to grab. It's about releasing it, grabbing it, finally getting it, getting what you're chasing, and then finally it goes back to the beginning. And that's the point of the game. That's the brokenness of the game. But that's the very foundation of what makes this game worth living, and the very foundation of what makes this game so broken and unworthy of any kind of sentient being experiencing something like this. So that's all I have to say, and I think I went on and babbled on long enough, so I appreciate it, and until next time, bye.